Hi, my name is Carlos and this is a pause for cinema. So I spent the last couple of weeks of my summer getting really into Game of Thrones, joining the nearly 9 million people already on board. The show itself is pretty spectacular. It's interesting to watch how series helmers David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, along with their team of writers, managed to juggle dozens of well-realized characters with separate storylines that are all connected to the Iron Throne. In fact, it's arguable that the show is virtually flawless, with both the statistics and the production value to back that argument. However, something that has bothered me about the show is its lack of visual stimulation in a couple of scenes. I'm not necessarily talking about visual effects or cinematography, both of which are undoubtedly some of the best seen today, but rather in the actual framing and blocking of much of the series.
Not next year, not tomorrow.
While there are frequent and stunning images of the Northern Ireland locations where it is filmed, much of Game of Thrones occurs within closed quarters chambers, where information is relayed to the viewer through dialogue scenes that are filmed in very standard and often banal ways.
Or should we tell the Boltons to pack up and leave?
We'll take it back from them.
Take a look at this scene from the Season 5 premiere, for example, in which Cersei talks to Lancel about his newfound faith in the Westerosi gods.
Your wounds from the Blackwater seem to have healed.
It wasn't my wounds that needed healing.
While the setting is filled with several useful aspects of production design to make what is going on in the frame visually interesting, director Michael Slovis instead opts to use a simple shot-reverse shot type of blocking that, were it not for the brevity and subject of their discussion, would make the scene rather boring.
I'm a different person now. I found peace in the light of the Seven. You can too. They watch over all of us, ready to dole out mercy or justice.
There are several ways that this lack of visual stimulation can be avoided, however. In a rather shallow analysis of Quentin Tarantino's directorial style I made last year, I brought up 3 different visual styles and claimed they were all creative and unique ways to block characters on screen. I'd like to revisit these analyses and claim that there's actually so much more that can be done to keep the audience's attention on screen instead of checking their phones every 5 minutes.
Go! Go now, please!
This scene is from Akira Kurosawa's 1981 Palme d'Or winner, Kagemusha. Here, 2 Japanese lords are discussing the future of their king, and even though the shot itself is static, Kurosawa uses the staging of the actors as well as the production design around them to create frames that draw our attention to the characters and keep us visually interested without cutting back and forth between the actors. By focusing on the visual aspect of his films, he keeps the audience focused and interested on the storytelling going on in front of them. There are less intellectually trying ways to keep the audience invested in the picture on screen, however. Peter Jackson uses the framing of the camera in relation to the characters in The Return of the King to relay the information within a scene that the characters are discussing. He starts with a close-up of Gandalf, bringing up the topic at hand to light.
Frodo has passed beyond my sight.
Then Jackson cuts to a master to localize the audience, but moves into a close-up of Aragorn, who introduces a new perspective to the conversation. He continues his usage of close-ups for the conversation and then cuts to a medium shot from a different perspective, showing that Gandalf is now referring to another character. Another close-up for a revelation.
I've sent him to his death.
Then a connection between 2 characters is established by framing them in an over-the-shoulder. Notice that how for the rest of the scene, most of the shots are now focused on Aragorn, with many of them containing slight push-ins to emphasize him winning over the group with the proposal he made. This type of visual storytelling is useful for scenes trying to relay information to the characters because it maintains a clean and interesting editorial flow while using camera framing to direct the audience's attention to the speakers and to the listeners within the scene in a way that the two fail to become confused. In turn, this visual storytelling becomes cinematic.
But we can give Frodo his chance if we keep Sauron's eye fixed upon us.
But the construction of a scene can also be manipulated to do something other than give information. In his debut film, Hunger, Steve McQueen refrains from distracting the viewer with unnecessary cutting by simply placing 2 characters opposite each other and allowing the dialogue to carry the scene. as opposed to the example from Game of Thrones. By holding the same shot for nearly 20 minutes, the viewer becomes challenged and immersed in the conversation as they wait for the change of perspective when McQueen finally cuts. Many filmmakers will also use framing to elicit different emotions. In Code Unknown, Michael Haneke creates a feeling of uneasiness by surrounding a young girl with a white backdrop, a motif repeated later in the film when the character of Anne can be seen not only trapped in a wooden room, but trapped by the very frame of the camera she stares into. Laurence Olivier constructs a joyful scene with movement, engaging himself and his fellow actor in a series of hugs, walks, and laughter, then changes the mood to a more sadistic feel by letting everything come to a standstill.
I'm little like an ape. He thinks that you should bear me on your shoulder.
And if you want to create a feeling of chaos, here's an example from Game of Thrones in which Jon is framed by a constantly changing and hostile environment. If you've been following me since my very first essay on this channel, you'd have heard one of my favorite quotes about film by now.
You know, it's the visual stimulation that hits the audience.
That's Robert Altman. This cannot be stressed enough because it is ultimately what separates film from other mediums. And by capitalizing on that visual stimulation as much as possible, a unique form of expression can be used to create different stories that impact the world, 24 frames at a time. Thanks for watching.
And who are you? The proud Lord said that I must bow so low. Only a cat of a different coat, that's all the truth I know. In a cold